Hello and welcome. My name is Michelle Vazzana, and I'm going to be talking to you about a very exciting and very misunderstood topic, and that is the topic of agility, specifically sales agility. How do you develop an agile sales force? Lots of sales enablement leaders and sales leaders are very concerned with this topic, especially in this rapidly changing world that we live in. So put your seatbelt on, buckle in, and get ready for an exciting conversation. So what does it mean to be agile? I borrowed from our friends at Webster, Merriam-Webster, and I'd like to highlight a couple of things regarding this definition of agility. The first part you'll see there I've underlined is ready, ability to move, so ability to act. And the second thing I've underlined down here is quick and adaptable. So agility really means that you're ready to make changes, to adapt. And if we're not teaching our sellers how to adapt, when to adapt, and why to adapt, we're selling them short. So a little bit more about agility. This idea of being adaptable, ability to adapt. The way that agile people adapt is they adapt based on the situation they are facing. So agility is a situational thing. So what do we mean by situational, and how do we learn more about agility? Well, let's go to the research and see the degree to which salespeople need to be agile. So significant research was done by Florida State University Sales Institute and then continued and further validated by VantagePoint that says, yes, salespeople need to be agile, but how do they need to be agile? Well, top performing salespeople adapt their sales approach based on the buying situation they face. And this is kind of an exciting finding because it flies in the face of how we've been doing sales enablement forever. So most sales leaders want to adopt a consistent approach to selling that everybody can learn and replicate on a regular basis. The problem is the salespeople that are the most successful don't always behave in the same way. They behave in a way that's much more agile. So in order to understand how to prepare any given position, whether it's sales or otherwise, to be agile, we actually had to look outside of the domain of sales. So take a look at these three different types of roles and think about what they have in common. Fighter pilots, first responders, and professional athletes. Well, they're very different types of roles, but they have something in common. And what they have in common is that the decisions they make and the actions they take have immediate and often dramatic consequences. You don't want to be making bad decisions if you're in one of these roles, right? The consequences are unbelievable. And the research that we've done would suggest that the same is true for sales, right? So what do these different domains do in order to develop systematic agility within each of these domains? Well, what we found is that there are three essential components for agility in any domain. And all three of these elements must be present in order for you to be able to drive agility into the role itself. So let's talk about each one of these. The first one is situational intelligence, right? You'll see situational across all three of these pillars of agility. And I mentioned earlier, agility is situational. And if it's situational, what are the elements of situational agility? Well, the first one is situational intelligence. And what do we mean by that? We mean that if you want to be smart about the situations that any given role faces, whether that's fighter pilots, first responders, professional athletes, or salespeople, you have to identify and document information on the most prevalent situations that they face. Then you also have to know not only which situations do they face, but what is the best course of action to take in each of these situations. So two components there, the situations and the best course of action. The next thing that's required is some level of situational readiness. So what do we mean by that? That means that you have to codify how the best performers execute the desired course of action in each of the situations they face. What do they actually do? And how do you know? And then how do you document that in a way that's repeatable and predictable? And finally, once you understand the situations and the best course of action and the specifics of how high performers execute, you actually have to train and drill. You have to train and drill people to recognize the situations, select the best course of action, and then execute that selected action and monitor the results. I'd like to draw your attention to something that's really important here. If you take a look at the elements for situational fluency and what we're training and drilling, recognizing the situation and selecting the best course of action, that's a decision-making framework. That's all about knowing how to make the best decisions, and then and only then to act on those decisions. That whole idea of decision-making is a huge element that's missing in most sales enablement efforts. Let's talk a little bit more about how these three elements drive situational agility in other domains. We'll take an example, and then we'll look at what this means in a sales environment. So let's take fighter pilots for an example. How do these three sort of pillars of agility unfold for fighter pilots? Well, the first thing that has to happen if you're preparing a fighter pilot to be successful in their role is you have to look at data on previous engagements. What are engagements that are similar to the ones that your pilots are getting ready to face? And they collect this information, and then they can analyze this information, and they actually call it DOPE. That's the acronym that they use. So once they've gathered the information and intelligence on situations that are most prevalent and similar to the ones that these pilots are going to face, they use that information to develop standard operating procedures, SOPs. And those SOPs identify what the highest performing fighter pilots do in any given situation. And then they have to train and drill these fighter pilots to be situationally fluent. And there's a gentleman that was named John Boyd. He was an extremely successful fighter pilot. And he was the one that developed this process for better decision-making and situational fluency for fighter pilots. And it's actually called the Ooda Loop. Many of you have probably heard of this. So the Ooda Loop is a decision-making framework that fighter pilots can use real time in combat situations to help them improve the quality of their decisions and increase their chances of staying alive, right? This is moderately important decision-making. So what does Ooda stand for? It means observe the situation you're in, orient the information that's coming in, make sense of it, if you will, based on what you know about data on previous engagements, decide. So make the decision based on what you observe and how you orient that information. Deciding is the third step, and then act on that. And once they act on that, they continue to observe, orient, decide, and act. This is a loop. This is a continual series of things that fighter pilots do in order to, be able to beat the enemy and stay alive. So how does this agility enablement approach apply to sales and enabling your sales force? Well, as you can imagine, it's pretty similar. And we had to study these other domains to even know how to drive sales agility in the sales force because nobody was doing it. So we had to study these other domains to learn, okay, what are the pillars of agility? And then how do those need to unfold in your sales force in order to make your salespeople situationally agile? Well, we have to gather situational intelligence. What kind of intelligence do your salespeople need to know? Well, they need to know the buying situation factors, and there are many, but what are the ones that most significantly influence needed adjustments in seller behavior? And in any given organization, you're facing some unique buying factors that might be different than another organization, even in your same industry. So what are the buying situation factors that your salespeople face that shape their buying situations? And based on what you know about those buying situation factors, what is the sales approach that's most likely to lead to a win given those buying situation factors? Those are two critical pieces of information. Once we understand those buying factors and the situations your salespeople face, and we've determined the sales approach most likely to lead to a win, what we then have to do is study your high performers. right? What do your high performers, your top performers do, say, and show in order to execute that sales approach that leads to a win given a buying situation they face? So this is where you actually codify, capture, get high levels of detail around what high performers do. Because if you don't do that, you can't replicate it. And that's what everybody wants to be able to do. How do you replicate the behavior of your top performers? Well, your top performers are monitoring their buying situations. They're using that information to orient which sales approach is going to work most effectively in each situation. And then they have to behave effectively in those situations. So what do they do, say, and show? These two sort of core pillars of situational intelligence and situational readiness are the part that most organizations just miss. They just miss this entirely. What they do is they focus on training and drilling. But what do you have to train and drill? Well, the most successful sellers adapt their behavior based on the situation they face. So you have to train and drill situational awareness. How do you teach your sellers how to actually evaluate buying situation factors and make sense of the buying situation they're facing? How do you then train them on how to select the best sales approach that's most likely to lead to a win given those buying situations? And then how do you effectively execute? You have to teach them how to effectively execute the sales approach that they've selected. So this is far different than most organizations enable their salespeople today. Most organizations go out, they select a sales methodology. That sales methodology gives them one way to execute regardless of the situation they face. And you're basically training your salespeople to be the opposite of agile. So when you train a one-size-fits-all sales methodology, this is the way to go, whether that's a consultative approach, whether that's a challenger approach, whether that's a value selling approach. If you're training your salespeople that this is the one way, and this is the best way to sell, the only people that are actually going to adopt that approach are your low performers, your low and average performers. When we studied sales behavior of high performers adapt. And they're also far less likely to adopt your one-size-fits-all methodology. In fact, Serious Decisions, which is part of Forrester research, found that when they queried top performers on what the biggest barriers were to achieving the objectives and outcomes that they want, exactly none of them identified a consistent sales methodology as something that was going to help them be more effective. And only 1/3 of high performers actually said that they adopt and use the sales methodology that their organizations train. Why is that? Why are high performers so unlikely to adopt your standardized sales methodology? Because high performers know that selling is situational. Sometimes they use a consultative approach. Sometimes they use a challenger approach. Sometimes they use a product approach. They adapt their approach based on the buying situation they face. So if you're making decisions on how to enable your sales force, make sure that when an organization that you want to work with says, yes, we teach agility, really dig into that. How do they teach agility? What do they mean by agility? Is it only based on buyer personas or different points along the buying journey? Well, if that's the case, well, that's important, but woefully inadequate. You have to have these three pillars for any position, whether it's sales, fighter pilots, professional athletes, or first responders. If any one of these three pillars are missing, you're, again, marginalizing your sales enablement efforts. So let's just say that you're a sales leader, you want to train your salespeople in sales agility, you agree that these three pillars are important, and you want to train these three pillars. But you might ask the question, well, what if I want more precision? What if I don't just want to teach sort of a foundational level of agility? What if I want more precise insights into the buying situations my salespeople face within my organization? Can I get those kinds of insights? Can I actually use data to determine what kind of sales approach works best in any given situation? And the answer to that is yes. And what we can do If you want more precise sales insights, what you can do is you can actually use deal level information, deal level data to give you much more precise and specific insights about two important things. You can get very precise insights for your organization around the buying situation factors that your salespeople face that most significantly impact seller behavior. You can also gain insight on which patterns of selling behavior work best in each of the different buying situations you face. So what does this actually mean? What does this actually look like within a given organization? So I'm going to show you an example. This is actually a real client of ours. We analyzed deal level data, very specific detailed information on attributes of the buying situations their sellers faced. And we analyzed wins and we analyzed losses. So in this particular organization, we identified 7 buying factors that most dramatically impacted adjustments in seller behavior. Then we clustered those factors and they revealed 5 unique buying situations. And this is what machine learning can do as far as gaining additional levels of precision around the buying situations you'll face. What you notice here is that these factors line up very differently across all 5 of these buying situations. So if you want to know, what are my sellers facing? Which buying factors matter? And how do those line up in ways that drive different buying situations? Here you go. Here's a real case example of just how that works. So once you understand the precise buying situations, the next question is, well, so what? What do I do about it? How do my sellers need to behave in a way that drives better outcomes? Well, for this same client, which you can see, if you look across the bottom here, you'll see that we've identified 4 different patterns of selling behavior. These 4 patterns were revealed in the research that Florida State University did, and we further validated. These 4 patterns of seller behavior are shown time and time again by high-performing sellers. So we track these 4 patterns of seller behavior and which of these patterns is most likely to lead to a win in each of the buying situations that sales force faces. So the first one, tell me what's new. A competitive or more product-focused approach was by far the most effective. The second situation, disruptive or a challenge-based approach. The third and fourth buying situations, a financial approach. And only in the 5th buying situation was a consultative approach most effective. Well, here's what's scary. This organization had spent many years and thousands of dollars training their salespeople on consultative selling. And more recently, they had trained their salespeople on Challenger. And so when we did this analysis for them, we found that you trained your people how to behave in only 2 of the 5 situations they face. And do they even know when to use which approach in each situation? That's a level of precision that many sales leaders would love to have, but don't know how to get. And that's why machine learning is so helpful to not only take the components of agility, but then action those in ways that are much more precise. And what we found through this work and through the research that we've done is that organizations that we work with have been telling us, I'm unique. I'm not like the other guy. Even though I'm in the same industry as this other company, there are some things about what my sales force faces that are unique. And we would say, yes, you are absolutely right. Not only are you unique, we can help you use data to determine just how unique you are and what to do about that to increase the success of your sales execution. So we know that sellers need to be agile. We know that the most successful top performing sellers adapt their sales approach to the buying situation they face. And they adapt it in systematic ways, and they display 4 patterns of sales behavior, not just 1 or 2. And the way they choose the correct behavior is based on the buying situation that they're facing. But the next question is, what about sales managers? Do sales managers need to be agile? And what does research say about that? And research says, yes, indeed, sales managers also need to be agile. But it's a little bit of a different slant on agility. Salespeople need to adjust to the external situation they face with their buyers. Sales managers need to adapt their approach to the internal situation they face with their sellers, right? But the components of agility are the same, right? The components are the same. You need the same 3 pillars of agility for sales managers and sales management agility that you need for salesperson agility. So how does sales situational intelligence matter for sales manager agility? How do sales managers adapt to the internal organizational situation they face? Well, in order to determine what situation they're facing, they need to evaluate the business results that they're targeting. Are they looking to increase revenue? Are they looking to move customer satisfaction? Are they looking to increase market share? And how does that relate to the sales objectives or KPIs that they need to accomplish in order to drive those outcomes? Are they looking to sell more new products or more existing products, or change their product mix? Are they looking to expand current accounts, or are they looking to acquire new accounts? And based on those KPIs they're targeting, that determines which sales activities are most critical to the achievement of those objectives and ultimately the business results. So that's the situational intelligence that sales managers need to consider and figure out. From a situational readiness perspective, once they've identified those activities that their sellers need to execute consistently well, they can orient their coaching plans to effectively coach those activities. They know what to coach, how to coach in a much more structured way, and when to coach. What is the right rhythm of coaching conversations and the duration of those conversations for effective execution and coaching of the activities that matter most, right? That is what effective agile sales managers need to determine in order to adapt their approach to the internal situation they face. And finally, they need to be trained and drilled on how to align results, objectives, and activities to make those key decisions, establish a rhythm of coaching execution to the right activities, and then be able to assess leading indicators of success. Which metrics need to move in order to determine whether or not those activities are being executed effectively and whether the coaching is working. So again, there's a decision-making framework. We're not just teaching managers how to coach. You have to teach sales managers how to determine the internal situation they face, the organizational situation they face, how to orient their behavior to execute against that situation, and then how to make those decisions and execute those decisions on an ongoing basis. The components of agility are very similar for sales managers and for salespeople and for fighter pilots and first responders and professional athletes. But you also may be wondering, okay, let's just say that I agree with these core components of agility, and I've trained my sales managers on how to adopt these components and execute against them. What if I want to gain more precise insight on how my high performers behave? Well, again, machine learning can help you do that. You can use real data from your sales managers to be able to tease out very specific insights on what your high-performing managers are doing differently, and you might be surprised by what you find. So for example, if we take that decision-making framework, what results am I targeting? Which sales objectives or KPIs do I need to be focused on to get me there? And then which sales activities do my salespeople need to be executing consistently well? Well, from a sales objective perspective, we can use machine learning to tease out specifically what's the level of focus that your high-performing managers have on specific KPIs, and how does their level of focus differ from that of your core performers or everyone else. And I've highlighted a few areas here, and this is a real situation from a real customer when we've done some machine learning and analysis of the sales management practices. You can see that core performing salespeople are far more likely to focus on selling existing products. High performers are far more likely to focus on selling new products. And they're also more focused on acquiring new types of customers. Now, if two of your KPIs are selling a new product that you've launched that year and acquiring new customers, well, here you go. Very big difference in the focus of your high performers and your core performers. Not only what's the difference but is it statistically significant? And in some cases it is. So you'll be able to know, well, gosh, why are we not getting the number of new accounts that we're targeting? Because 75% of your sales force isn't focused there. What about activities? What are high-performing managers doing regarding activities they're focused on that's different than the core performers? And how do we know which activities, when focused on, really drive the best performance? Again, we can use machine learning to identify patterns and activity focus to give you very specific insight on which activities have an outsized impact on higher performance. And they might not be the ones you think. So we can actually identify very specifically of all of the activities that your managers could be focused on, which are the ones that when they focus on them, when they focus their sellers on them, drive the best outcomes. But then the next question becomes, okay, well, let's just say that these are the top 5 activities that high-performing managers are focusing on, but how are they focusing on them? How are they coaching those activities differently than everyone else? Again, we can use machine learning to identify very specific insights, not only on which activities high performers are focused on, but how are they coaching? Is it more formal or informal? How frequently are they having those coaching conversations? And what's the duration of those coaching conversations? We can get very specific, detailed information on what your high performers are doing differently when it comes to coaching to those activities. We can even look at the specific content that's most highly related to better outcomes that they're discussing in those coaching conversations. So you can drive systematic agility within your sales managers, and you can use machine learning and data to get very specific insights on what your high performers are doing differently when it comes to their management coaching practices. So what's the takeaway here? Of all the things that we've talked about in this discussion of agility, what are the takeaways that you can take back to your organization if you want to create an agile sales force? Well, the first one is selling is situational. What do we mean by situational? You have to evaluate the buying situation you're facing and the buying situation factors that drive that, and identify the pattern of selling behavior most likely to lead to a win. For sales managers, sales management is also situational. You have to adapt your sales management approach to the internal situation you're facing by aligning the results, objectives, and activities in a way that's going to increase the chances of driving the outcome you want. If you want to get higher levels of precision on either how to sell more effectively or manage more effectively, you can use machine learning to identify very specific insights for the situations your salespeople face and the behaviors that win, and the situations your managers are facing and the management practices that win. So hopefully this has been highly informative for you. Hopefully we've given you a very different but specific way to think about agility and then act on agility when it comes to enabling your sales force. If you'd like to learn more, you can take a few steps. You can reach out to speak with someone in our organization. I've given you the contact information of our co-founder. You can also go to our website and read our white paper on sales agility. And if you want to learn more about our research or our approach to machine learning, you can contact me. So thank you so much for your time. I hope this has been extremely informative for you. And I hope that this information that we've shared with you has been useful for you. So I hope you enjoy the rest of your